one of the things that happens a lot is people ask questions like, well, I have heart disease, what should I do? And I have cancer, what should I do? And I'm at risk for diabetes, and what should I do? And I want you to know that the answer, my answer, which could be different from somebody else, is that the answer is the same for everybody. And what that means is that if you have cancer and you want to use Qigong, what should you do? Well, learn how to do Qigong and find practices that you like and then use them. Well, what about if I have diabetes? Learn Qigong practices and then find the ones that you like the most and then use them. What if I have heart disease? Same. What if I'm at risk for Parkinson's disease? Same. So the idea, this is a false idea that we have. It's because of the medical industrial complex, because in medicine, if you misdiagnose a person and give them the wrong medicine, you can get sued. And so it's very important to have a specific diagnosis. When you're doing well-being maximization, and when a person is well, of course, they're functioning well. And when they're functioning well, then they have self-healing capacity. And if they have self-healing capacity, then whatever their health problem is going to improve, whether they're having medical input or not. And so with mind-body practice, it doesn't matter what the disorder is regarding what kind of practice you should do. What matters is, can you learn enough Qigong and get interested enough to be able to develop a relationship with some practices that you can then put together in a practice session for yourself that lasts at least 20 minutes. That's the foundation for how to break through to, and then of course, once you realize the power of doing practice for 20 minutes, then you're going to think, well, what if I did it for 30 minutes? And eventually you'll realize that's better. And then it goes from there. It's very personal. It grows very personally. And the whole idea that it should be different because of your diagnosis, it's very confusing, and it doesn't need to be. So one of the things that we say about Qigong is this. Qigong is easy if you let it be. So in other words, you can make it as complex as you want. Oh my gosh, there's so much interesting complexity. But if you let it be easy, it'll open a door for you. And then you can figure out eventually how complex you want it to become. But at the beginning, it should always be easy and accessible.
I think that is wonderful advice. Oftentimes when we talk to people about movements of their body of any way, shape, or form, someone's like, what is the right exercise for me? It's like, well, it's the one that you will do. And it's very similar in this practice. Experiment, research, try to find one that is going to resonate and be more in alignment with you. And then just like you had said, develop your own. And then, before you know it, it's the same thing. Like you go for a walk for 20 minutes around the block. That feels great. So then you go a little bit further. It's the same thing with this type of practice, is exactly what you were saying.